Good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, apologies really for the technical issues that we've had with setting up this show and tell. I think we swapped from a webinar to a Teams meeting due to a few technical constraints. So thank you that you're all still able to join, and my thanks to Adam, Matthew and Sarita for the workaround at such short notice. So, as Matthew had said, this is the July edition of the Customer Service Programme, Show and Tell. And the focus for this month's Show and Tell really is on the work that the team have been doing to look at the satisfaction of our housing tenants. So what we're hoping to do is take you through today the various disciplines and the activities that the team have been working on and give you an insight into that work. Next slide, please. As you said, what we're able to cover today is basically give you an introduction, so a bit of an overview and background as to this, why we're doing this piece of work, overview of the roadmap, the indicative timeline in terms of what the team are working to, take a look really at the various disciplines across the programme and the activities that the team have been working on. So looking at the user research, Alice and Grace will give you a view in terms of our customer voices and making sure that those are heard and keeping the programme honest in terms of our human-centred design approach. We'll then look at how that's fed into the work that Kizara, our business analyst, has been doing around the data analysis and how that's fed into the process mapping and the service design work with Ben and Lawrence. Once they've taken you through that, we'll look at how that then feeds into the content design work of Bruce and Sienna, and looking at the user experience and the prototyping and the demo work that's been done there. We'll touch a bit on the outcomes and values, and then look at the next steps before we move into questions and answers. Next slide, please, Kieran. Okay, so a bit of background to this piece of work, as well as the discovery work that the programme did last year around tenant satisfaction and the pain points and some of the recommendations that we pulled out there. The service has really gone through a review with the Regulator of Social Housing. There was a notice that was issued, basically, that said that Birmingham had breached in a number of areas, primarily around the tenants' needs were not understood, that our tenants didn't feel values, and these really were perceptions of our tenants coming through. As a result, the regulator have introduced some new tenant satisfaction measures and standards, which were implemented, went live from the 1st of April 2023. And the housing management are really, as well as looking at the main areas of tenant satisfaction measures, which will be issued in mid-September, they're looking really to do a bit of a deeper dive into the tenants' perceptions or feedback, and really understanding a bit more detail around what some of our tenants' pain points are in how they actually provide that feedback and what's done as a result of that feedback. So this is in response really to the RSH work, and move into the next slide. The team will really take you through the activities that we've done and really to look at addressing them. And we've been working in 2-week time box sprints. We're currently on sprint 5. And if you move to the next slide, please, Kieran. The problem state that the team are looking at the moment and looking to resolve is that customers really, our tenants, do not have a standard facility to share their opinion of housing services that they make use of. The data is not collected or utilised in a consistent way across housing. And this has really led to a lack of accountable tenant satisfaction insight and really many missed opportunities for improvement. So that's another problem statement that the team have been working on. I think the next slide, I need you to hand over to, So what we've done is work with the service really to look at prioritising this work. There's a number of areas that they want to gather that insight for. So we've worked with the service to look at prioritising based on user needs and also business need, to look at a kind of roadmap, a product roadmap for the work that they want doing. So the team are currently focusing on lettings, voids and allocations at the moment, and estate services as those first 2 pieces of work, with a view to moving through to mutual exchange, antisocial behaviour, leaseholders and tenancy breaches as that first package of work. We will then work with the service to identify what those next priorities are in terms of gathering that feedback from our tenants. I think now I'm handing over to Grace and Alice to pick up on the user research.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, so myself, Grace and Victoria will talk through what user research we've done for the programme so far. So brief sort of intro is that for this project, we wanted to speak to both the staff and also the tenants as the users to make sure that we're delivering a service that meets both the staff's needs and the users' needs. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Kieran. So firstly, we conducted some staff focus groups. So we conducted these with the service area staff in 4 key areas. Lettings, allocations and voids, and also estates. But as you see on the roadmap, this is our sort of first focus. The aim of the focus groups was to understand the current processes of collecting feedback in those areas, any difficulties that they've experienced in the current process, the staff's expectations for the feedback, how staff will like to use the feedback that's been provided, and what an ideal process would look like for them. Next slide. So the key findings from the staff focus groups were that there was no formal way to collect feedback across the service areas. They had no regular requests for customer feedback, and feedback is not collected or recorded in a standard way. There were sort of ad hoc initiatives to try and collect feedback, but this hasn't been sort of regular. The feedback is not always correctly attributed to the right service area as well. So the feedback that they may receive is not related to their area of the tenancy process. So we'd like to improve that so that they're getting the feedback direct to where they can action it. And thirdly, the feedback tends to be more around complaints. So customers tend to give feedback proactively, and this tends to be negative feedback. So we'd like to create a service that enables them to give neutral and positive feedback as well as the sort of negative feedback, and they can action that all together. Next.
So yeah, in addition to doing our research with staff, we've also been doing research with tenants, trying to better understand what they want in terms of giving feedback. So far we've conducted telephone surveys with 18 tenants. This is ongoing. So the data that we present does have the caveat in that we haven't fully explored all of it. We are still collecting feedback. So the aim of the survey is to understand the user needs and preferences around providing feedback. More specifically, we're asking about what would encourage users to give feedback, because we know users aren't always giving feedback at the moment, the frequency and type of feedback they'd like to give, and how they'd like to be contacted regarding their feedback. And this includes any sort of contacts about what changes we've made following their feedback too. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is all caveated by the fact that this is ongoing work. So we've seen some initial trends emerge, so I'm going to share those with you, but this is ongoing. So we'll learn more about our users as this continues. So next slide. First of all, like I said, most of our respondents haven't actually given feedback before, but a lot of them are really keen to. So in terms of encouraging feedback, we really wanted to understand what would encourage them to actually come forward and give feedback to BCC. So the top 3 things in this category were someone asking them in person. So for example, if there was a site visit or if someone was conducting a repair, just asking them on the spot, do you have any feedback for me? That's a real motivator for people to be able to capture it straight away. They would also like to hear a lot more about what BCC have done following their feedback, so closing that feedback loop. So when we are taking this feedback from users, we are also sort of feeding it back to them in terms of what we've done with their feedback. So that's a real motivator for people leaving feedback. And also, as we would expect, incentives. People like to earn money and prizes where possible. So one thing that we've looked at is perhaps like an entry into a free prize draw. So anytime someone gives feedback, at the end of the month, there's a prize draw for an Amazon voucher or something. Some of that will be achievable, some of it won't be, but it's really interesting just to see what our users' motivators are. So if we go to the next slide, we'll sort of see this broken down in a graph. So this is exactly what I've just explained. So the biggest motivator or the biggest encourager would be someone asking in person at that time. So this is where it's really important when we're thinking about these surveys. We're looking at the different trigger points that we can use to activate these surveys so that it is really fresh in someone's mind. So if they want to be able to give feedback straight away, then we need to be activating these surveys straight away. Looking at this, we can see that, yeah, closing that feedback loop is going to be a really big motivator. So we need to make sure we are communicating with people. Incentives are always a good motivator. Also receiving reminders to give feedback. So not just asking once, perhaps asking several times for feedback would be useful. Next slide, please, Kieran. So this is the last bit from me before I hand over to Victoria. But this is quite a nice quote just about that feedback loop, is I would like BCC to actually implement the suggestions you receive rather than just using the feedback as a tick box exercise and doing nothing about it. So this really speaks to the idea that users are really keen to give feedback, but if they don't feel like it's going to do anything, it's not going to change anything, then they're unlikely to actually continue and give feedback again. They'd also like to be told what they are going to do with the feedback. So again, they just really want to see this loop closed. So not only knowing what they've done with the feedback, but perhaps even more transparency around, we are collecting your feedback, here is what we will do, here's how we'll use it, here's how often we'll review it, being really open about that process up front. So Victoria, over to you, and next slide, please, Kieran.
Yeah, so we also asked respondents about the frequency and the type of feedback that they'd like to give. And so what we found from the results was that most respondents would actually like to spend about 3 to 5 minutes providing the feedback. But when we did ask them how often they wanted to give us that feedback, we had mixed responses. So from once every 3 months to after every single interaction with BCC. Next slide, please. So yeah, we can see that on this graph here that, again, when we asked how often would you like to be asked for feedback, we saw that it was majority answered once every 3 months. Then following that was, again, after every interaction with the council, and then again, once every 6 months there. So, next slide. And then we also asked about the type of feedback that they want to give. So we found that this was also very mixed here. So people would like to give feedback in a variety of different ways, ranging from yes or no answers right up until open-ended responses there. So next slide, please. So yeah, so we gave a few options, so yes or no answers, multiple choice answers, satisfaction ratings, number ratings, and then open-ended feedback. The majority did go for the yes or no answers. However, again, it was still quite shared equally across the other 4 options. So we're just seeing there that the residents do want a variety of options there. So next slide, please.
So this is me again. So the final sort of insight we had about sort of communication, we wanted to know how they wanted to receive sort of our communications, not just on sort of the way that they provide feedback when asking them to provide feedback, but also sort of when they want to be notified about the actions that we've taken on the feedback as well. So when we've asked how they want to be contacted about providing feedback, most respondents said either by email or by phone call. But when we asked how they'd like the council to notify them about any actions they've taken, most respondents again wanted email, but also updates from text messages, phone calls, and website updates as well. So if you go to the next slide, here you can see, as I said, sort of email updates for notifications on sort of actions that have been made is the highest sort of request, but we can also see sort of updates on the website, text messages and phone calls as well is also something that tenants were quite keen to have. And I think that's all our insights from the user research so far. As I said, this survey is ongoing and we're merging this with the sort of focus groups as well to make sure that the approach that we have is good for both our users and also the staff in the service areas as well. I think I'm passing over to Lawrence now.
I think you're still on mute, Lawrence.
Thank you. So yeah, service design is all about the end-to-end view of everything. So we start by understanding the current landscape, because without knowing what problem we are solving, we won't be able to solve the problem. So that's where all the visualization starts. So if you look at the first slide, we started looking at the current landscape, and you can see, like the 2 red circles, ignoring the small one. The one end we have the tenants, on the lower end we have the BCC, and ideally we want to have like solid lines, the connection between the two, or complete loop And as you see the first circle, there are all these different services, starting with antisocial behavior, estate services, leaseholder, tenancy breaches. So all these 6 different services, we're able to see, map them and see which one do not have any existing mechanism in place for feedback and which ones have, and what has been going on and what's the current situation. So all the dotted lines would mean there's no complete connection between BCC and the tenants. So there's not existing a formal way of doing feedback. If you look at the next slide, we start visualizing that with different lenses. So when we look at that very light picture of the current situation, we start dropping all the pain points and user needs in their context. So we want to see the user needs of both the BCC staff and also the tenants. Any questions we have and gaps in what we know, we started putting that on that map. Any touch points where tenants interact with the council, and any trigger points that have existed before. When did anyone send a survey in the past? And then we start now plotting some opportunities for where the future surveys might go out. So that is a kind of it helps us have one place to refer to and also communicate within the delivery team. And when we are talking with the services, we are able to see things in their right context. So on the next slide, we went deeper into looking at what the processes are within each of those services that we started with, which is letting, voids, and allocations, as well as estate services. Yeah, so we before we went into the process map, so this collaborative session is by playing back the research together with the user researchers, the work we've done to map out the current situation. We played back that to the delivery group and looked at all the pain points and challenges and tried to reframe those into opportunities for improvement. So that is the exercise there. We theme those groups and we theme those points and see any new insight that we get from that, and then we turn that and add them into the future state, trying to create how things might work in the future. So in the next slide is where we have the inside look at how services operate at the moment. So together with our BA in Birmingham, we looked at how the processes work within those first two services and try to point out where trigger points existed before or where they might exist in the future. So this was able to help us see where we can get optimal value, as we discussed with the services and the wider team, to see where the trigger points would offer us. As user researchers have told us, what the best timing for when we can get the best accurate feedback from the tenants, so we can see it on a visual process map.
Can you read out some of the opportunities you've identified, Lawrence, because it was a bit small to read on the slides?
So from that, how might we? So one of them is like, how might we benchmark housing satisfaction levels, both within BCC and also from other local authorities? And the other one would be, how might we ensure that right feedback goes to the right team? Because one of the issues in the user research found by user researchers was people giving feedback that does not relate to the particular team that is asking for feedback. So identify a problem and then reframe that into kind of an opportunity of how we might be able to resolve that. The other one would be, how might we report on these satisfaction levels simply and clearly? Okay, yeah, sorry, cool. It's a bit tiny, yeah, but there's quite a number. So they will be dotted all over that current situation, but then those will move into the future states as, so Ben is going to show you like the future thinking. We try to use those as well to try and figure out and fashion the future state of things.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Kieran. So data objectives as well. So based on the research and the interactions we had with the service teams, we found that one of the big objectives for this piece of work was backstage efficiency. So data objectives come straight from that. We're able to think of how we can establish clear measurable data objectives from the beginning and the metrics for measurements, so that can help get actionable insights from the feedback that is got, finishing that loop where people feedback and then that feedback is used to give to improvements in the service to help improving the services and the relationship between, of course, the council and the tenants. So we also had this collaborative session where we work together to try and prioritize those objectives, how they can be achieved with this Moscow scale. And that's the result of that. You can't read them through, but it's basically what needs to happen, what's the most urgent thing, and what we could add to that. And of course, and in that kind of a prioritization scale. So all this will feed into the future state.
Can you tell us what they were, please, that we can't read them?
So I'll tell you what they are. Just 1 second. So response rates is one of the key measurements, satisfaction score, qualitative feedback. So there's a balance between the closed-ended questions and open-ended questions, as open-ended questions help understand the perspective, the feelings of the people and their perceptions. There's also a point on diversity information to know that every group is represented. Then there's reporting and also publishing the changes that are made as a result of feedback with all their supporting points that would make that happen, like making it easy and possible for tenants to respond, making questions as simple as possible, prompting people to respond to feedback, giving incentives. So that kind of activity. That makes sense. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I just couldn't read the must have, should have, could have. So just, yeah, wanted some context. Thanks.
Welcome.
And we can share the link to the Miro boards and so forth in when we share the decks, which will enable you to see in a bit more detail some of the work that the team have been doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Just sometimes otherwise you don't get a feel for the thing that's being shown, and that would be sad when it's obviously had so much work put into it.
Yeah, it's a good point, Annie. There's lots of really detailed outputs that you can all look through after this in your own time. Thanks, Lawrence. So the question is, how do we move from this broken process that Lawrence has taken us through to an efficient system? So everything that the team's covered so far have been sort of paving stones to get to this point, and all part of a solid design process to understand that problem, understand user needs, understand staff needs before fully designing a solution and then iterating it. So apologies again, the visual on the right is quite small, but it's just there as an example of where we're at. And it is a work in progress, but so excuse the post-it notes all over it. But we're thinking for the future that this is a bit like a brain, which in itself is a system. So it's got larger component parts that don't change. So those sort of big spheres there that Lawrence introduced. And then sort of smaller neurons firing around it that do change depending on the situation. We're going for this sort of circular visual as opposed to the sort of process diagram that Lawrence that we visualize as the as is. So there's that natural feedback loop already in place, connecting those two spheres. But a few main points about it. It has a standardized framework supporting it. So you'll see there design, engage, analyze, action, which has been pulled from some survey best practice work that the team have been doing. And that's a framework that can be applied across all of housing and beyond. We're also right at the top there, you can just see design. We're building a survey design process into it, which is that first part of the system, supported by the best practice guidelines that are work in progress at the moment as well to support how this all works, to basically ensure that although service areas will have a degree of flexibility, we also have that consistency. So both in the creation of surveys and when we get to it, the backstage analysis, and what we're going to do with that data, with the actions, and in terms of maintaining and completing that feedback loop. The smaller neurons you can see there in the circles, they're the steps in the system and in the services that lead to these logical trigger points for each service. And those can vary depending on what the service is. So it might be when a tenant moves out, or when a potential tenant declines of property after viewing, or when, indeed they've moved in, settled in, and so on and so forth. So a few other key points. Following our collaboration session with the How Might We's, some of which Lawrence read out, we're also looking sort of beyond MVP with some of these ideas to, explore that how in the future can we be clever with data, and potentially use different data points in the council to build profiles of tenants so that we have as much intelligence as we can to improve services. And this also means that down the line we don't have to ask for too much info in the surveys. So there's some ideas like that we've been exploring, and also things around backstage efficiency, how the data gets to the right team, and so on and so forth, and then how it's shared back with tenants. So I suppose to tie a knot in this, and feel free to go through the Miro board and have a look at this in detail. The intention is at the end of this sprint we have an MVP version of this visual for the first 4 services, but crucially we'll have this framework already in place to swiftly roll it out to the other services in the future, where we will just need to change the neurons, if you will, for those services to ensure that it works well, depending on their needs. So that's the 2B and where we're at. I think I'll hand back to Lawrence just to tie this up.
Thanks, Ben. So along with this work, we scanned the horizon for what other experts say, and that includes the Regulator for Social Housing, industry experts like Housemark, Chartered Institute of Housing, and GovUK, and others, to just see what they say about best practice for coming up with a satisfaction survey framework. And this is how we are laying it out. So this is a document associated with this chart, which has more details, and this will remain as a guideline for building surveys in the future. And it's in 2 parts. There are the principles, and also we'll have like a step-by-step how to create a survey. So based on those 2 key phases that Ben has mentioned, design, engage, analyze, and action, it's kind of a complete loop. And it's basically 10 points to consider, or principles to consider. Having clear objectives from the beginning, in designing a survey, select the appropriate methods based on what user research has found, like people would want to be contacted through. Have an effective mechanism where that you've already informed people what you're going to do, and then you do it all the way, completing that loop. Asking feedback at the right time. Ensuring people about confidentiality and giving them a choice for anonymity, having a robust data analysis back office within the teams, which leads into getting those actionable insights. And that will lead to continuous improvement, and then communication and transparency, just saying what you've done as a result, what we've done as a result of the feedback, and always engaging staff in the process, and how that loop goes round and round. So that's the best practice principles guide. And I'll hand you over to Nikki or Kiran, or to content,
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Hello, everybody. I'll pop my camera on for a moment just to say hello, because I've got a slightly dodgy connection here today. My name's Bruce, and along with Sienna, who's my colleague, we're the content designers. As most of you probably know, that means that we write the words based on the research from the user researchers, and also from what we hear from service design. On this occasion, we've also taken the opportunity to meet with some of the people who actually work in the service, for example, Mitchell and also Jonathan, who've been very helpful to us in drafting some of this material. So the main thing that I want to mention, again, something you all know, I'm sure, is that as part of the sort of accessibility, or our part of accessibility, the survey is written in plain English, so it's nice and straightforward. And I think the actual rule of thumb is that it must be quickly understood by a 12-year-old, 12 or 13-year-old, or one reading. So basically, information is delivered in easy fashion. So we've got this rather jolly white on black version of the survey in front of us. I'll just turn my camera off for a moment, and start going through the survey itself. A few things worthwhile mentioning before we kick off. If you look in the box at the top, this tells us that it's basically a thank you to the users for taking part in the survey, and tells them what we're actually going to do with the information we got. It's going to be there to improve the service of BCC to the users and to their neighbours. Another quick word before we start on the basis of the main part of the survey is that we went for one survey dealing with 3 separate services, which is lettings, voids and allocations. We felt this was better than dealing with each separate thing one after another. And certainly as it's also shorter, it's about 12 questions long, there's a much better chance of getting a good response from people, or getting any response from people when we ask the questions in the survey. So let's have a look at it now from the first question, which is the allocations part of the survey. Question there, how did you find the process of signing up to the housing register? Fairly simple question, because you may be 18 months to 2 years between signing up and actually getting into a property. I should say that we suggest that this survey should be done at the point at which the tenants get into the property, as they're more likely to, again, respond and answer our questions of the survey. Quantifiable answers, very easy, neither easy nor difficult, etc., etc. On to the second question, also for the allocations part of the survey. How did you find the process of finding and bidding for a property on Birmingham Choice? I think this particularly came up because it was mentioned to us that some users have a bit of a problem finding their way around Birmingham Choice or using it. We've kick off with a quantifiable, very easy, down through to very difficult answer. And then we've got a little space there, a box for people to expand on their answer if they want to and give us a little bit more information, feedback a bit more. If we could go to question 3, please, Kieran, that'd be great. Question 3, this is a voids question. It's a question specifically about viewing the property. Were you satisfied or dissatisfied? We gave you enough time to view the property before you decided to take it. As some of you may know, the order with taking a council property is that you bid for it first and then you're kind of awarded it, and then you get a chance to have a look around it to decide if you can see yourself living there. So this is an issue. People do need to have enough time to get a good view of the property and to see how they, feel about the idea of living there. Once again, quantifiable, very satisfied, etc., down to very dissatisfied. Question 4, again a voids question, slightly wobbling about there. Thank you. This is the second question about viewing. Basically, were you satisfied or dissatisfied that we gave you enough information about the property at the viewing? Again, quantifiable from very satisfied down to very dissatisfied. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Sienna, my colleague, who's going to take us through the rest of the survey. Sienna, thank you.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I'll take you through the last 7 questions of the survey, and these last few also include some of those important TSM themes. So question number 5 is another voids question. Do you think your home is being maintained to a good standard? And the resident can answer either yes or no. And we've also put in a text box so they can explain why they think their home has been maintained to a good standard or not. Then question number 6, this relates to lettings. How did you find the moving in process? And the resident can answer either very straightforward or down to very complicated. Question 7, so this covers the TSM theme of keeping tenants informed, and it relates to lettings. So what did you think of the advice and guidance we gave you before you moved in? And we've provided some examples here. So for example, guidance about rent, benefits, fire safety, how to switch on utilities. There was a mention of a gas switch on service for residents, so we thought that could be an example to include here. And then the resident can answer either very helpful down to very unhelpful. Then question number 8 is covering all 3 services, but it's a suggestion from the voids team. And how satisfied or dissatisfied are you that our staff kept you informed during the whole process? And again, the resident can answer from very satisfied to very dissatisfied. Question number 9, so this covers the theme of tenants are being listened to, and it again covers all 3 services. So how much did you feel you were listened to during the whole process? and the responses can range from all of the time or down to not at all. And we've also included another text box here so the resident can elaborate on their answer. Question number 10. So this is an overall satisfaction question for all three services. So overall, how satisfied or dissatisfied were you with the process of registering, bidding for and moving into a new home? And again, you can answer from very satisfied down to very dissatisfied. Question number 11. So this covers the theme of tenants are treated fairly and with respect, and this is for all three services again. And the question we've gone for is overall, how satisfied or dissatisfied were you that BCC treated you with openness and honesty? And again, you can answer from very satisfied or down to very dissatisfied. And then the final question, question number 12. So this is for all three services again. Overall, overall are you satisfied with your new home? And you can answer yes or no. And if your answer is no, please tell us why. And we've again provided a text box for the resident to explain their answer. And so that's the end of the survey, and I'll pass back to Bruce, who will go through some of our notes.
Thanks very much, Sienna. The notes are just a couple of additional suggestions that came up through research, basically. One of them would be that we suggest tenants probably get an automated email or text or other response saying, thanks for doing the survey. Maybe also saying someone from BCC would be in touch. And if we do that, obviously, we'll need to give them an opportunity to give us a telephone number or email or phone number to contact them on. Another thing that came up during research, and it's something that some other councils or government departments do, is the idea that tenants could request a survey in their preferred language. Obviously, there are many languages spoken both as a first language or as a second language in Birmingham and the area. So we're not, it's not entirely clear what BCC's policy is on this, although we understand there's access to a translation service. Other options could be, as for example, the Health and Safety Executive do, sending out a paper survey in various languages, or having additional digital services in languages other than English. So those are just two, I suppose, thoughts or ideas that we had on top of actually drafting the survey. So that is it from me. I will now hand you back to Kieran. Thank you.
Hello. Yep, thank you very much for going through that. Has that come through? Skipped a bit, never mind. Okay, so on the outcomes and values, looking at basically what has been the outcome of, like I say, all your work that's been done. So we have the first survey, although it's kind of conglomeration of lettings, voids and allocation process. We've got the applied TSMs across all of the housing surveys, so we make sure that there's that consistent theme to make sure that tenants are listened to and that they're valued and that's appreciated by BCC, so that's seen from the user. And then we've got the framework for all the different housing services satisfaction measures to go forward based off that roadmap that Nikki previously shared. So the value in terms of how it affects the user or the citizen at the end of this is that there's the end-to-end service design approach, so that we can understand the problem before designing the solution. It sounds simple, but just make sure we cover our bases, understand any pitfalls before we go ahead, design a service, and then actually there's a gotcha down the road and think, well, we've missed out a large amount of user need here. So that's part of the value delivered so far. And then also the single view of the housing service from the tenant and the BCC perspective, which is rolled into that kind of to-be solution that we've been going through, and making sure there's the consistency and feedback so that. Oh, no, okay. So there's the consistency and feedback so that we can get really condensed metrics to make sure that BCC can actually make decisions based off actionable feedback and data in the future. Okay, on the next steps, so in terms of service design, we'll be looking at the future state of the to-be for for the roadmap of different services, and also, yeah, that best practice guide on how to build an effective survey so that we can really flesh that out and then implement that across that roadmap. It says there, yeah, content design and user research. So we'll be testing all of our design hypotheses with users, making sure that we've really bottomed out what their needs are, any pitfalls that we need to address, and making sure any surveys are developed with the user in mind and that they actually answer logical and helpful points of their journey. So it mentions there the antisocial behaviour is a slightly more complex survey, so we'll be tackling that next after lettings, voids allocations and estate services. So yeah, that's the I suppose the next time you see a show and tell on the housing survey tenancy measures, it will be the antisocial behaviour. It will be the main thrust.
I think, Kieran, as well, it's worth mentioning that, you know, at the end of this sprint, we're due to hand over, in terms of the prototype, hand that over to build. So that'll be picked up as part of the solution for the tenant satisfaction is within the NEC solution, part of that comms module. So the team are on standby waiting for the final versions to be handed over, and that will start to be built out within that solution as we move through into test.
Yeah, so ready for that September deadline as mentioned in the roadmap slide.
Thank you, guys. I think over to any questions at this point. There's been a number of questions dropped into the chat, and I think the team has been trying to answer them as we move through. And there's the point around managing tenants' expectations, and yes, part of the user research is making sure that we gather those user needs so that we are meeting those, and then part of that feedback loop that Ben and Lawrence communicated was making sure that we have that communication loop and are engaging and feeding back to our tenants so that they know what's happening and when. Yeah, we will share the links to the Miros, and we'll share the deck and the links to the various Miro boards so that you can have a look through the detail in your own time. Thank you, Marnie. Alice has responded to Simon's question around respondents not wanting to provide feedback. Alice did respond that there was one respondent out of the 18 that were engaged that was clear that they did not want to provide feedback at all. Some that didn't know that they could, they'd never thought really that they could provide feedback, and others who did but didn't know how to. So hopefully that answered that question, Simon. So Simon's also asked, is okay a plainer English way of expressing neither easy nor difficult? I'll hand that over to the content team, our content designers.
Probably not particularly useful at the point of view of feedback, I'd guess, but we could always try it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering if generally if there's opportunities to plane up some of those responses, yeah, to throw some Jacob Nielsen at you. The different wordings for the different groups of responses seem to be a fair amount of cognitive load. I'm just wondering if standardising the responses would make it easier on people.
I think that's something that we'll certainly be able to pick up when it comes to testing this out with some test users. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to move to got a couple of hands up. Armani, your hand must be tired. It's been up for a while.
Thank you, Nikki. It's fine. Thank you, team, for taking us through your work. It's really interesting. I like coming to show and tells or playbacks. So I guess there's a question for the delivery team, but I'm also keen to understand from the server's point of view when this info was or is played back to them. So what was the most interesting or surprising piece of insight that you found after having engaged with these stakeholders and going through this process? Was there any sort of golden nuggets that people weren't aware of before, that the UR uncovered? I'd be really keen to understand that.
Grace?
So I can speak to this one a little bit. I think it wasn't necessarily a golden nugget, but something that we can really hold on to is that even though there weren't necessarily like clear processes in place for collecting feedback, one thing that we saw time and time again with the teams that we were speaking to is they really, really want to get feedback. They really want to get it. They really want to use it. So it's a real motivator for us doing this work and doing it really well. So not anything that we necessarily didn't expect to hear, but something that was really, really good to hear and really informs how we go about this work.
Thank you.
Alice?
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing that was quite interesting to me. In the sort of telephone surveys, we did ask respondents if they'd like the opportunity to have questions that weren't anonymous or opportunity to provide feedback that wasn't anonymous. We actually had a 50-50 split with that currently. So I think that's showing that some people do want to have their name to the feedback because they would like to have sort of a response to what they've given feedback on, and they'd like to know what the action's been taken and have that sort of communicated to them directly.
Thank you, Alice. Hope that's answered your question, Armani.
Yeah, it has. Thank you, Nikki.
Annie, I think you've got your hand up.
Hiya. I was just wondering what the driver was for this work, and why feedback on tenant satisfaction and housing was and is being looked into. And I was also wondering what the September deadline is. So yeah, just keen to understand how it became the priority. Or, you know, was there unrest? Is there a lack of feedback?
So initially, there were a couple of drivers, to be honest. Last year, when we did what we call the big discovery, where we looked at the data, looked at our complaints data, looked at the volumes of interactions with our services from our customers, looked at the online .gov interaction, looked at the fire and send forms, and we formulated that top 5, or top 50 really, but we focused on the top 5 as part of that first year around those surfaces that really had those high volume engagements, and you know the complaints were high. Housing was one of those. So part of the discovery that we did in first year was really to understand the pain points within housing as a whole. That then led to a piece of work around tenant satisfactions. So again, the service were aware that the review was due from the RSH and wanted some insight really that how they could really start to formulate that piece of work. So we did the piece of discovery from that, and the recommendations and insights that came out of that really suggested that this was a piece of work that needed to be done. On the back of that, the review then was conducted by the RSH, and I'm hoping I'm getting this in the right order, and if the service are on, do jump in. And Birmingham actually received a notice in terms of a breach. So we were breaching in terms of how we were engaging with our customers, or the perception that our tenants had of how we were engaging with them and the feedback that they were providing and how we were interacting with that. As a result, the new tenant satisfaction measures legislation was built, and the service are responding to that with the overarching TSM measures that are due to go out. And I think the first survey is due to go out mid-September to address that. But they also recognise that the TSM questions were quite high level in terms of what they were asking, and it didn't give them that insight into what the issues were, what the problems were. So they wanted again to do a further piece to further drill down to find out, well, okay, if we're not providing satisfaction, it, you know, is not great. In what areas, how, and if there were themes that were coming from that they could really understand from a more granular survey to really unpick some of those pain points. So that's kind of the prioritisation and how it came into the workflow within the customer program.
Fab, thank you. That's really helpful. And is this work that is on kind of how you're going to gather the feedback and survey to then understand what issues are coming up to be able to address those issues. Is that right?
Improve, that's right. So it's I think as Lawrence mentioned, continuous improvement. You know, what are the issues? How we actually deal with them and action them, and then feeding that back. Hopefully improving service as we go, or improving satisfaction levels as well.
Thank you.
We've got any more questions in the chat that we haven't answered, or anyone wants to actually read out? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought on your questions and where we've got to. I think Simon, we responded to yours. Tracy?
Yeah, I deal with Wise Move. We've got our own customer satisfaction questionnaire that we designed, and it covers the 3 aspects of the service that I do. But that's shaped by using that's shaped what we offer to the customer, what we offer to the tenants when they're downsizing. So we've used ours. Everything goes on iCase, that, you know, every time I move a tenant into a property, they get a customer satisfaction questionnaire, and that all gets loaded onto iCase.
So what the team have done for the priority areas, they will have looked at what's in existence already. Part of the prioritisation that we did at the start before we kicked off this piece of work was work with our sponsor, which is Nestle in this case, and the service leads to prioritise which areas we would look at first. So potentially Wise Move may form part of that prioritisation, but if it's looking at kind of those steps, maybe it's something that we need to just have a look at, team, just in terms of just make sure that we've got that covered off in terms of the research. So thank you, Tracy. We'll take a look at that as well. And Shelley?
Hi. I did ask in the chat. I just wondered what you meant regarding building a profile of the tenants, and GDPR has been mentioned as well. And I also wanted to ask about the percentage of people so far. I know you said that you haven't asked many, and obviously you'll get better results when you send this out to tenants, but will you be covering the rest of housing, and you know, how do you plan to engage? Would it just be with people using services, because a lot of tenants don't use the service, and I think they'd like to engage with them. You know, the most tenants, the only time that they use housing or get in touch with housing is if your boiler breaks down.
If there's a problem.
Yeah. So and you're not getting your yearly busy you know, anymore, but since COVID things are different, aren't they? So I think it's a good idea. I think people do like to give feedback, whether it's positive or negative, but just giving that and be part of focus groups. I think it's really important, but it's about getting it out as well, isn't it, to people? I think people just think they don't want to. Tenants don't want to engage because you know, but they do want to engage. Yeah.
Thank you. And Grace or Alice, I don't know if you want to come back with just in terms of some of the user research, the groups that we've engaged with, and what we've tried to do to make sure that that's, you know, we're getting a representative view.
Yeah, so far we have taken the approach to engage with tenants over the phone. This is so that if they have a translator present, we can still talk to them even if English isn't their first language. It's part of the lettings process. So anyone who is within the housing teams will have probably gone through the lettings process to get there. So we're trying to capture a really broad audience by getting them at that initial stage as part of their tenancy checkup anyway. So it's sort of something that they would be doing. And we're trying to capture as many people and as many responses as possible. I'm not quite sure what you meant by build a profile of tenants. I'm not sure where that was in the presentation. Sorry.
I think it was Bruce who said about building a profile. I'm sorry, I tend to.
Oh no, that was service design. Yeah, I mean that's an early idea. because we've got to be sensitive to GDPR and things like that. I think the concept of it is like, you know, in the future, once this is all set up and running, how can we be smart with, you know, joining different data points that we might have? So in terms of, you know, pooling things together and things like that, you know, we're not going to start building profiles of tenants next week or do anything, you know, that goes against GDPR and things like that. But part of, you know, the reason why we do these sort of collaboration opportunity sessions and sort of do a bit of blue sky thinking is that we've almost got, you know, the future roadmap in mind of what we could do, and then we scale it back to what we actually want to do and can do now. So that was just an example idea that came out of one of our sessions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Yes. Christian, you've got your hand up. I think time. We'll take the one question, and what we will do is just try and respond to any of the outstanding questions in the chat, to make sure that we've got them covered off. But Christian, do you want to come in quickly?
Oh yeah. I work at a TMO, actually Bloomsbury EMB, and we got our own tenancy survey forms. But how do we link with what a BCC is doing?
So part of what we did at the start, and what we'll do as part of the prioritisation once we work through this first bank, is then look at, you know, based on user needs, based on the service need, look at what's in scope next in terms of you know, that roadmap for work. What we all are also doing, as Lawrence mentioned, is the kind of best practice guiding principles and a step-by-step how-to, so that, you know, the service will have the collateral to still work within the framework of what we've developed to then scale up and roll out further surveys going forward.
Okay, so does it mean that maybe in future, or I mean, every housing department will be using a standard survey?
I think that's the kind of point we want to get to, where there's consistency in design, approach, and also, you know, that back-end integration. So yeah, I mean, that's the ideal. As Gosha says, that would be the dream.
Is there any timescales on this, please?
Not for the wider piece. What we'll do, you know, as we move through in this rate, in terms of the various elements, it's something that we will work with the sponsor to really negotiate a wider timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Gosha, do you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Really great presentation. And just coming back on the question that you just asked, Christian, I think a very important element of our work is upskilling and sharing everything we have been doing. So it's about making the work sustainable and actually making ourselves redundant so that we can share everything that we know, and we can make sure that that information stays with the council, not only with those people who are working with us directly, but also with those who are in other parts of the organization, just making sure that all that information is reusable and can be reused. So this is a big ambition for us through all the work we are doing.
Thanks, Gosha. I think, yeah, that just ties nicely. We're just at time, guys. So as I say, we will try and make sure that all the questions in the chat are covered off and respond to those. We will get the recording circulated once it's been suitably captioned the next and so forth, and we'll get that circulated with our next sprint note. Just want to end by thanking you all for attending and your contributions today, and I know the team have welcomed the opportunity to share the work that they've been working on the last few weeks, so thank you very much.